Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into some really cool new research about our canine companions and more specifically how their brains change as they age.
That's a hot topic.
It is a hot topic, and rightfully so. I think, we all want our furry friends to live these long and healthy lives, and that includes keeping their minds sharp.
Right.
So the study we're looking at today explores a new way to measure cognitive decline in dogs.
Yeah.
Which could be a real game changer for how we approach senior dog care.
It really could, because you see, current methods for diagnosing cognitive decline in dogs rely heavily on what owners report about their dog's behavior.
Right.
And, those observations can be subjective.
Yeah, for sure.
And difficult to interpret, especially in the early stages when those changes are really subtle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes it's hard to tell if your dog is just having an off day, or if something more serious is going on.
Totally.
So this new research is offering a more objective approach.
Exactly. They developed a battery of 5 short tests to assess different aspects of a dog's cognitive abilities.
5 tests. Wow, okay, so that sounds pretty comprehensive.
Yeah.
What kind of things are they looking at with these tests?
Well, they focused on areas of cognition that are known to be affected by Alzheimer's disease in humans,
Okay.
like spatial memory,
Right.
executive function, and social cognition.
That makes a lot of sense because dogs and humans share a lot of similarities when it comes to aging. So studying cognitive decline in dogs could offer valuable insights into Alzheimer's in people too.
Exactly. That's why this research is so valuable.
Yeah, that's super cool.
Now, one of the most exciting things about these tests is that they rely on a dog's natural problem-solving skills.
Okay.
They don't require extensive training beforehand, like some traditional cognitive tests for dogs.
Interesting. So it's more like observing their spontaneous behavior in specific situations.
Right.
Okay.
That makes them a lot easier to administer to.
Yeah. Oh, I bet especially for older dogs who might not be up for lengthy training sessions.
Exactly. The researchers were really focused on making these tests practical and efficient so they can be used with a wide range of dogs in different settings.
That's fantastic. I'm eager to hear more about how these tests actually work.
Sure.
What were some of the tasks they used to measure things like spatial memory and problem solving?
Well, let's start with spatial memory. One of the tests, called the 2-location task, was designed to assess a dog's ability to remember where treats were hidden.
Okay, I can picture that. Is it kind of like a shell game for dogs?
Yeah, you're on the right track. They had 4 blinds set up and sometimes hid 1 treat, other times 2, and they wanted to see if the dogs could remember the location of the treats, especially when there were multiple hiding spots.
That sounds pretty tricky.
Yeah.
I bet my dog would just go straight for the blind that smelled the strongest.
Well, some dogs did rely more on their sense of smell, but others were able to remember the locations based on visual cues. It was fascinating to see the different strategies they used.
Yeah.
They also used another clever test called the delayed search task to assess memory retention.
Okay, tell me more about that one.
In this task, they hid a treat behind one of the blinds and then made the dog wait before searching for it. But here's the catch. During the waiting period, they introduced distractions.
Oh, wow. So it's like testing their ability to hold that memory in their mind, even with distractions popping up around them.
Exactly. And as you might expect, the longer the delay and the more distractions, the harder it was for the dogs to remember where the treat was hidden.
Right.
This task really got to the heart of their working memory abilities.
Oh, wow. That's a real challenge.
Yeah.
It sounds like these tests were carefully designed to mimic real-world scenarios that dogs might encounter. I mean, think about all the distractions our dogs face on a daily basis.
That's a great point. And that was a key goal of this research, to develop tests that were both scientifically rigorous and relevant to a dog's everyday life.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm really impressed so far, but we've only talked about spatial memory. What about the other areas of cognition they were studying?
Yeah.
Like executive function. What kind of
Right.
tests did they use for that?
Well, one of the most interesting tests for executive function was the cylinder task.
Okay.
This one assessed a dog's ability to inhibit impulses and adapt to changing rules.
Okay. I'm intrigued. How does it work?
They would place a treat inside a cylinder, and the dog had to figure out how to get... First, they used an opaque cylinder, so it was pretty straightforward.
Okay.
But then they switched to a transparent cylinder.
Oh, that's sneaky. So the dog could see the treat, but couldn't just go straight for it. They had to, think it through.
Precisely. Some dogs were able to resist that initial urge to paw at the cylinder and figured out they needed to go around to the open end to get the treat.
Wow.
Others, however, struggled with that impulse control.
That sounds so relatable. I can definitely see my own dog falling for that trick,
Ah,
but it gets even more challenging, right?
yeah.
You mentioned something about changing rules.
Right. To test their flexibility, the researchers rotated the cylinder 180 degrees so the opening was on the opposite side.
Oh, gosh.
They wanted to see how quickly the dogs could adapt to this new rule and adjust their strategy.
So it's all about learning and adapting on the fly. I bet some dogs were quicker to pick up on that change than others. Did age play a role in how they performed on these tasks?
It did, and that's what we'll dive into next.
But I can't wait. This is already so fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm starting to think about my own dog's behavior in a whole new light.
So as we were just saying, age did seem to play a role in how the dogs performed on these cognitive tasks.
Yeah, that's what I was so curious about. Did the researchers find any clear patterns when it came to age and cognitive performance?
They did in the first experiment, which involved 123 companion dogs of various ages. They found that older dogs tended to show declines in certain cognitive abilities.
So it's not just us humans who experience some cognitive slowing down as we get older, huh?
Nope.
Our furry friends go through it too.
Oh.
What were some of the specific areas where older dogs showed declines?
Well, they noticed declines in spatial learning and memory, as you might expect. Older dogs had a harder time remembering the locations of the treats in those memory tasks.
That makes sense. We've all seen our older dogs occasionally forget where they buried a bone in the backyard, right? Or like walk into a room and forget why they went in there.
Right.
But it sounds like these tests were able to measure those memory changes in a much more precise way.
Exactly. And it wasn't just memory that was affected. Older dogs also showed declines in something called response flexibility.
Response flexibility.
Yeah, that basically means how well they can adapt to changes in the rules or their environment.
Oh, okay. So like when you move the furniture around and your dog keeps bumping into it because they're used to the old layout?
That's a perfect example. Or think about the cylinder task where the opening was switched to the other side. Older dogs had a harder time adjusting their strategy and figuring out the new way to get the treat.
So it seems like those higher level thinking skills might be particularly vulnerable to age-related decline. Is that what the research suggests?
It does seem that way, and it's consistent with what we see in humans as well. Those executive functions which allow us to plan, organize, and adapt to new situations often start to decline a bit as we age. It's a natural part of the aging process.
It's fascinating to think about how those same processes are happening in our dogs' brains too. But it's not all about decline, right? I remember you mentioning something about older dogs spending more time gazing at the experimenter during one of the tasks. What was that all about?
Yes, that was one of the most intriguing findings from the social cognition task.
Okay.
While older dogs spent less time near the experimenter overall, they actually spent more time looking directly at the human.
Oh, that's so interesting. It's like they were really trying to study the human and figure out what they were up to.
It could be, we're not entirely sure what it means yet, but there are a few possible explanations. One theory is that as dogs get older and their other senses like hearing and smell start to decline a bit, they might rely more on visual cues for social interaction.
That makes a lot of sense. If you can't hear or smell as well, you might naturally start paying closer attention to what you can see.
Exactly. Another possibility is that older dogs are simply more attuned to their human companions and might be trying to compensate for any cognitive changes by paying closer attention to our cues and signals.
So those soulful gazes from our senior dogs might be more than just a longing for treats.
Maybe.
They could actually be a sign of their deep connection to us and their efforts to stay engaged with us, despite any age-related challenges.
I think there's a good chance of that. It really highlights the special bond between humans and dogs and how that bond can deepen and evolve as our dogs get older.
It's heartwarming to think about, okay, so we've talked about the first experiment and the interesting findings about age-related cognitive changes. What about the second experiment? You mentioned that it took place in a real-world setting. Tell me more about that.
Yes, in the second experiment, they wanted to see how feasible it was to administer these tests in a busy clinical environment. They took the research to a veterinary hospital.
So taking it from the lab to a place where it could actually be used to help dogs. Yeah. What were they hoping to learn from this experiment?
The main goal was to see if these tests could be easily integrated into a typical vet visit and if they provided valuable information that could help veterinarians assess a dog's cognitive health.
I see. So it's all about practicality and real-world application. Did they run into any challenges trying to administer these tests in a bustling vet hospital?
They did face a few hurdles. It's not always easy to get a dog to focus in a busy environment with all the unfamiliar sights, sounds, and smells. However, they were able to successfully test 35 dogs who are already part of ongoing clinical studies at the hospital.
Okay, so they found a way to make it work. I'm curious, did all of the tests translate well to the clinical setting, or were some more challenging than others?
For the most part, the tests adapted quite well. The delayed search task, the cylinder task, and the human interaction task all proved to be quite feasible in the clinical setting.
That's encouraging. But what about the two-location task? The one with the multiple hidden treats? I remember you saying that one was a bit more complex.
You're right, that one presented a bit more of a challenge in the veterinary hospital. They found that some dogs had a hard time searching for both treats, especially with all the potential distractions in a less controlled environment.
That makes a lot of sense. Trying to remember where two treats are hidden is hard enough without the added stress of being in a new place with lots of unfamiliar smells and sounds.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of considering the context when interpreting a dog's performance on these tests. A dog might perform differently in a familiar home environment compared to a busy vet clinic.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
It might take some tailoring to get it just right for different dogs in different situations.
That's a great way to put it. It's about finding the right balance between standardized testing and individualized interpretation.
That makes sense. But they weren't just observing the dog's behavior right. You mentioned something about comparing the test results to a standard questionnaire about cognitive decline. Tell me more about that.
You're right, they wanted to see how the results of these new cognitive tests compared to existing methods for assessing cognitive decline. So in addition to administering the tests, they also had the owners of the dogs complete a questionnaire called the Canine Dementia Scale, or CADES for short.
Okay, so the CADES is a tool that vets currently use to get a sense of a dog's cognitive health based on the owner's observations. What kind of things does it ask about?
It asks owners to rate their dog's behavior in various areas that are commonly affected by cognitive decline. Things like disorientation changes in sleep-wake cycles, house soiling accidents, changes in social interactions, and anxiety levels. It's a way to get a broader picture of the dog's cognitive function based on their behavior at home.
That's really helpful. So by comparing the results of the new cognitive tests to the CADES scores, they could see if these new objective tests aligned with what owners were seeing in their dogs day-to-day.
Exactly. It was an important step in validating these new tests and understanding how they might be used alongside existing clinical assessments. What did they find? Well, that's a discussion for part 3.
Ooh, you're leaving me hanging. I'm eager to hear how those results shook out.
Yeah.
But I guess we'll have to wait for the next part to find out. All right, so welcome back to the deep dive. We've been talking about this awesome new research on how to measure cognitive decline in dogs, and now it's like the moment of truth.
Yeah.
We left off with the researchers comparing the results of their new cognitive test to the CADES scores, which, reflect the owner's observations of their dog's behavior at home.
Right.
So what did they find? Did the test results match up with the CADES scores?
Well, the findings were both encouraging and a little thought-provoking.
Okay.
They found that dogs diagnosed with moderate or severe cognitive impairment based on the CADES generally scored lower on the cognitive tests.
Okay, so that makes sense. The dogs who were showing more obvious signs of cognitive decline at home, according to their owners, also tended to perform worse on these objective tests.
Exactly. It suggests that these tests are tapping into real cognitive differences and can potentially provide a more precise way to measure those changes.
That's exciting, but I remember you mentioning that it wasn't a perfect match.
You've got a good memory. Yeah, there was some overlap in the scores.
Right.
Some dogs with mild impairment, or even those considered normal on the CADES, actually performed poorly on some of the cognitive tests.
So the tests were picking up on things that weren't necessarily obvious to the owners. What do you think that means?
Well, it could mean a couple of things. First, it suggests that these tests might be sensitive enough to detect subtle cognitive changes that owners aren't noticing yet.
Okay.
Maybe those dogs with mild impairment on the CADES were just starting to experience some cognitive decline that hadn't fully manifested in their behavior at home.
So the test could be like an early warning system.
Right.
Potentially catching those changes before they become more noticeable.
Exactly.
That's a powerful tool for vets.
Early detection is key when it comes to managing any health condition, and cognitive decline is no exception. If we can catch those changes early on, we might be able to intervene and potentially slow down the progression.
Yeah, that's a game changer for dogs and their families. But you mentioned another possible explanation for the overlap in scores.
Yeah, the other possibility is that some dogs are just really good at compensating for their cognitive decline in their familiar home environment. Maybe they've developed routines or strategies that help them navigate their daily lives despite some cognitive challenges.
Uh-huh.
But when they're taken out of that familiar context and placed in a more challenging environment,
Right.
like a vet hospital, those subtle cognitive changes become more apparent.
Yeah, makes sense. It's like how some people with early-stage Alzheimer's can function quite well in their own homes, but might struggle in unfamiliar settings. So these tests could help vets identify those dogs who might be compensating at home but could benefit from some extra support.
Exactly. It provides vets with more information to help them understand the full picture of a dog's cognitive health and tailor their recommendations accordingly.
It's amazing to think about how much progress is being made in understanding and managing cognitive decline in dogs. It wasn't that long ago that we just thought these changes were an inevitable part of aging,
Mm.
with nothing we could do about it.
Right. You're right. There's been a real shift in our thinking, and this research is a perfect example of how scientific advances are leading to new possibilities for diagnosis treatment and ultimately a better quality of life for dogs experiencing cognitive decline.
This whole deep dive has been so enlightening. I know I'll be paying closer attention to my own dog's behavior as he gets older, but this isn't just about helping dogs, right? You mentioned earlier that this research could have implications for Alzheimer's research in humans as well.
Absolutely. Dogs and humans share so many similarities when it comes to aging and the brain. By studying canine cognitive decline, we can gain valuable insights into the processes underlying Alzheimer's disease and potentially develop new strategies for prevention, diagnosis, and treatment that could benefit both species. It's a win-win situation.
It's incredible to think about how much our furry friends can teach us about ourselves and how to live healthier, longer lives. I'm really excited to see what the future holds for this line of research. What are some of the key takeaways you hope our listeners will remember from this deep dive?
Well, I hope you'll remember that cognitive decline is not an inevitable part of aging. There's so much we can do to support our dogs' cognitive health throughout their lives.
Yeah.
Paying attention to their behavior, providing mental enrichment activities, and working closely with our veterinarians are all essential steps. And now with these new cognitive tests,
Right.
we have even more tools to help us understand and manage those changes, potentially extending the quality and length of our dog lives.
It's inspiring to think about the difference this research could make for dogs and their families. Well, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. It's been an absolute pleasure exploring this fascinating topic with you.
It's been great talking with you too.
From Vet Neurojar, keep those minds-inspired hearts light and tails wagging.